and welcome to all you data leaders, obviously to Data Leaders, your convenient weekly update on data news. This week we have one single theme but three articles focused on organizational features important to set up a data organization for success. And yes, I will be suggesting at least an initial framework to think about where to position the role in response to Gabriella Phillips' question in the forum on the reporting line of the data function. With that said, if you are watching this video on YouTube, be sure to request to join the Data Leaders group on LinkedIn. The link is in the description, but it's also currently on the screen right here. We are going to also look at the challenges in the business case of the CDO. At least that's what the article seems to say. What's really underneath it, though, when you get into the weeds, is the positioning and the focus of the role of the CDO itself and how indeed it can bring value. Finally, and on the same line of thinking, we will look at the survey from Domino Data Lab and my friends at Data IQ. The survey is UK based and it shines a light on what's happening in the data science space, in particular the challenges that firms see in the build and delivery of a data science capability. And it suggests that there is a need to be a model-driven culture in organizations. So not a data-driven culture, a model-driven culture. So let's see. Now, again, it's been a busy week speaking with all of you. There's some great posts in the group on LinkedIn, and thanks to Dan Everett from Informatica, who has been posting some super interesting articles, ranging from Google research on AI through to MDM and burnout articles. So make sure you check out Dan's contributions in the group, and a huge thanks to Dan for contributing so far. So please keep it up, and everybody please join him and join in the group. Okay, so please remember, as many of you have started to do, please like and comment on this video and let us know what you think about the content and the topics raised. I am sure they will drive discussion this week, and if you like what you are seeing and you get value, please subscribe and tick the little bell to ensure you receive updates whenever we post new content. So let's get started with episode 4 and that age-old question of where to put the data organization. Okay, well, this all started from a question in the group on LinkedIn from Gabriella Phillips. So thanks, Gabriella, for asking it. It also is a subject I'm fascinated about. And in fact, when I first joined Domino, this was one of the first questions I saw on the internal platform. It's something that drives hours and hours of work, of operational models and on governance models by many, many CDOs. So where should the organization be placed? Well, when I first saw the question, I put a poll in the group. It was very early stages in the group and there weren't that many people who had joined at that point. However, the survey ran for 2 weeks and 79% of the responses were that it should report to the Chief Executive Officer. Now, clearly people in data see the business value of ensuring that it's guided together with the overall strategy of the organization. This may not always, though, be practical, and it will depend on the number of things where the data organization ends up. Assuming, first of all, that one homogeneous organization is the goal, and if it isn't, then there could be various places where it makes sense to put the various different groups. Now, assuming that we're talking about a single group, I think we need to consider a number of variables before we can properly answer the question. That said, I don't intend to answer it fully today, but I do hope we can spin up a meaningful conversation here on YouTube and in the group on LinkedIn. I also believe that we need more academic research on this topic, so I am searching for research partners if you feel you can help. Now, I believe that the variables start with the scope of the role, and to do this properly, we need to determine whether the role of the data organization includes or excludes the technical delivery and infrastructure components. So when elements of data engineering will exist within the group, that probably drives a different shape. And of course, we have to ask whether analytics or data science is in the group, whether data governance, data quality, pipeline management, model management, transformation, business intelligence, and many other functions are inside or outside of the group. And in either case, what the scope of that responsibility is. Additionally, is the role responsible for that broad transformation on an enterprise-wide basis? So following on from that, we need to then consider culture and structure. How does the organization work And how do decisions get made? Is the organization an empowered, distributed organization, or a centralized top-down organization, or perhaps a mix of the two? And in either case, where is the real power base in the organization that will achieve the objective? Now, of course, that brings us to perhaps the most important element. What is the objective and expected outcomes of the organization or the chief data organization or office? What is it that the board expects? Is it operational, revenue growth, customer growth, regulatory? This most likely will inform the scope that we discussed in the first point. And then we need to look at maturity. And there are a few components to be considered within this. Data maturity overall, are we starting from scratch or building off a mature base? Data literacy, what is the overall data literacy, particularly within the business functions? These two elements will help determine how quickly the capabilities can be federated and moved towards self-service. Of course, you have to look at the technology maturity. How ready is the tech organization to support the needs for data availability, accessibility, security, privacy analytics, and more? These things start to form the basis of a framework to help you determine where the organization should report and what the overall journey beyond those first steps might be. Bear in mind that there may need to be an evolution in the organization towards that CEO. In the meantime, though, it could be that the function ends up reporting to one or many a business leader, the COO, the CFO, Chief Transformation Officer. It could be that the tech organization will not be ready or will not be in the right place to be able to support the capabilities. And in some cases, that might be a call for it to report into technology. But let me say this, because I think it's a really important component. If you believe that the chief data organization or the data function should report to technology, it's likely you don't need a chief data officer. What you probably need is a chief architect or a chief data architect. Because if this role is in technology, it's unlikely to be what we traditionally speak about as a CDO role, which is a business-led role, not a technical capability. So, those are my thoughts, even an initial structure and a way to think about it. Let me know what you think. Leave me comments below. And now let's extend the discussion slightly with an article from MIT Sloane from this month, which asked the question whether the CDO position can add enough business value to justify its existence. So let's take a look. So first off, what is this article? Well, whilst the title is Making the Business Case for a Chief Data Officer, it's more focused on setting out the focus areas for the Chief Data Officer and its positioning. So leads on nicely from the initial discussion and Gabriella's question in the group. The article starts by clearly stating the outcome that the right Chief Data Officer can help firms reap the benefits of data-informed decision making. So the article reflects on the growth of the role from 12% of companies having a Chief Data Officer in 2012 to 65% in 2020, but points out that the focus, reporting lines and structures of the role are still in flux. And that is true. Right across the board, you see different shapes of Chief Data Officer and different places that they sit within the organization. And of course, it aligns with my point in the modeling of where these roles should report. The first is to understand the shape and the objectives of the role. Additionally, I would challenge whether this is in fact a problem. Whilst you think that the CFO's responsibilities are standard or CRO's responsibility are standard, are they really? Why would the role of the Chief Data Officer be any different from those roles of the COO and the CFO as examples, where actually we see different boundaries and different sets of responsibilities within them? And we are seemingly obsessed with some form of cookie cutter approach for the Chief Data Officer, whilst at the same time saying that we should be focused on solving business problems. And I think that is a little bit challenging because those business problems always are a different shape. So why wouldn't the Chief Data Officer and the Chief Data Officer role be tailored to the business problems that we find? The article stresses that around 50% of Chief Data Officers have primary responsibility for data, whilst only 33% characterize the role as successful and established. I think, this could also reflect the fact that there are many shapes of Chief Data Officer. Some are within a business unit or a sub-business unit within the organization. So I don't know how much that really tells us. I think real enterprise-wide chief data officers that sit at board level must have primary responsibility for data within the organization, certainly the journey of data. I think, of course, part of the role of the chief data officer is to make sure that there's federated ownership of those things. So I think the question in itself may have different responses depending on where you sit. The article makes reference to Doug Laney's work and references the findings that companies that work on data management, treating data as an asset, are 3 to 4 times more likely to reap the benefits, and recommends that CDOs leverage data for 3 specific benefits: guiding strategic insight and decision making, improving business performance, and transforming business process, products and services. It then goes on to discuss whether the CIO should be a boss or a colleague, and fascinating question, of course. In the context, it represents 2 archetypes of a CDO: the consultative CDO who reports to a CIO, and the executive CDO who is responsible for all things data. And I'm not sure I agree with this first archetype. As stated before, even the consultative chief data officer would be better placed working for one of the other C-level leaders to ensure that the consultation came from a business perspective and not a technical one. The article also points out elements that I think support this. First, that most companies have an IT organization but have not considered separating the I from the T and pursuing information and technology as separate pursuits, and indeed that the CIO is already fully loaded with traditional tech transformation. Indeed, this split in my mind makes a lot of sense. The article finishes with the qualities of an executive chief data officer, and those are sort of broadly broken down into breaking down silos, promoting data democratization and data literacy, monetizing data, and supporting new products and services. And finally, clarifying that the chief data officer role needs to be defined by the objectives and priorities of the company in order to be successful. I think we've touched on that. The question I have really is not what is the overlap with the CIO. That separation of responsibilities, I think, can start to be clearly articulated here. Moreover, I think what's important is what is the overlap, if that is the scope as described, between the chief data officer and the chief digital officer. And perhaps that's an opportunity for an entirely new article, but I think it's important to consider. Finally, let's take a look at an article from Business Wire, which references a survey produced by Data IQ together with Domino Data Lab. The article talks about model-driven culture, but I cannot find reference to it in the underlying survey. So I feel possibly this is a Domino invention which I cannot determine the relativity to data maturity or the broader data-driven culture. So I need to look into that further. The underlying survey shows it's focused on how to scale data science, a topic we touched on briefly last week, with a subtext of relative lack of understanding in organizations to the topic. And again, this extends to the overall discussion around shape and challenges that exist in the role of the Chief Data Officer. It shows that the overall level of adoption of data and analytics to be primarily in the developing stage, with 44% of respondents identifying their organisation in this way, but a similar set, 42% combined, describe it as either advanced or reaching maturity. The survey shows a broad spread of industries at the end. Once again, there is a link in the description. So it would be really useful to understand the relative maturity of industries to get the context of the results of the survey. Once again, the information is there across the set of respondents across these vastly different industries, but we don't really get the flavour from the data that's presented for whether some of those industries are tipping the maturity curve in one particular direction or the other, whether more mature or less mature. Interestingly, 40% state their biggest challenge is weak understanding or support of data science in the business, and challenge directly related to data literacy, but not necessarily, in my opinion, as specific as model-driven culture. And 38% state an unreliable or inadequate IT architecture, perhaps also representing that data literacy may well be as much of a problem for IT as it is for the rest of the organization. It's very easy to consider, I think, that the literacy within IT is higher than it is anywhere else in the organization. Again, data has not been necessarily the core focus of IT over the last decades. Otherwise, I don't think we would have the need for chief data officers in the first place. Further, 32 to 34% state conflict between IT and data, lack of communication or inefficient deployment being significant challenges, whilst 29% of respondents didn't know what level of business benefit they expected from data science. Now, I've pulled out some different numbers from the survey as I felt the original article was heading down a route that only reflected certain sides of the outcome. And as usual, it's important to look at the underlying information to see it for yourself. So I've included a link also to the survey that DataIQ created. The survey paints a picture that I think would be more valuable with deeper analysis to understand the industry sectors that are more mature, where they are seeing conflicts arise or barriers in place, and those organisations stating those are structured. There is potentially some very interesting and important data here that could help to answer some of the questions posed in the previous two components or the previous two articles. So definitely worth taking a look. Click on the link in the description, get a look at the underlying information. And I think that's it for the content this week. We got through it relatively quickly. I hope you're enjoying the content. Please add your comments down below. Let us know what you think, and we will see you next week. Take care. Bye.